Hey, thanks everybody for joining us for another CYCJ webinar. Today we're going to be hearing from Dr. Jake Phillips and Dr. Jenny Ward from Universities of Middlesex and Cambridge, respectively, where each of them hold the position of Associate Professor. We're going to be talking about youth adult hubs, ways in which we can respond to young adults who've come into conflict with the law and subject to community supervision. That's particularly important here in Scotland, where 23% of all community payback orders are relate to somebody under the age of 25, yet only 60% of those orders are completed. So I think Scotland, considering how best we can tailor the support and interventions to that particular cohort, is of particular importance. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Jenny and Jake, who are going to talk us through the research they've undertaken within England and the adult youth hubs, particularly in Newham. And following that, we're going to hear from Dr. Nina Viswani from CYCJ, and thereafter we're going to open it up to questions from the floor. So as we're going through today's presentation, please do put your questions or comments within the chat, and we'll get through as many of them as we possibly can. Okay, with that, thanks again to Jenny and Jake, and over to you, Jenny.
Thank you. I'll just start sharing. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Oh. Okay, so, well, thank you very much for inviting us to present today at the seminar on the research Jake and I carried out with a team of colleagues from Sheffield Hallam University and Middlesex University. Cambridge is there in the Cambridge logo, acknowledging Jake's recent move to Cambridge University. And we're speaking today on this pilot probation hub, young adult probation hub in Newham, East London. So it was in place from April 2022 to 2024. And there was a 2-year evaluation funded by the Ministry of Justice, which we were tasked with. So this is what we're presenting on today. The final report is available. I think Sally's posted it into the chat, but if you search the Ministry of Justice website, this is the final report from the evaluation. I'm going to begin the presentation and hand over to Jake. We're mainly presenting on the key findings from the study, from the evaluation, as published in the final report, but we're involved in further conceptual analysis at the moment as we're working through publication plans, and so we draw upon some of these today, in particular around this notion of young adult first framework, which aligns similarly to the child first framework within youth justice, and some points around Tom Tyler's procedural justice and the principles that underpin that. So briefly, just giving an outline here. What I'll do is locate this study, the focus on young adults and the young adult specialist probation hub that we evaluated within the broader context of the emphasis on young adults at the moment across jurisdictions, young adults in the criminal justice system. I'll give a very brief description of the hub and its particular features, because these are very much rooted at the centre of the responses young adults and staff gave us through the interview, through the follow-up interviews we carried out over the 2-year period of this, in particular the co-location of external partner services working with and alongside in the same space as the probation practitioners. So the uniqueness of the actual design of the hub. So we were looking at key challenges and benefits of the hub. I'm going to focus, or we are focusing on the key benefits today. There were some issues in respect to referral of young adults and over-referring. This comes out briefly within this presentation, but mainly we're focusing on what were the benefits of this hub to young adults and to the staff working within this setup. So what we'll do is then leap into some lessons learned, and as you've pointed out, Ross, the interest in the Scottish context to focus on young adults, the young adult age group 18 to 25. So if I'm just locating the specialist probation hub, 18 to 25-year-olds, but also those 17 and a half and above who can be transitioned from youth offending teams into adult services. So the age group that the hub was incorporated was 17 and a half and above through to 25. This work I'm locating within the really increasing focus on this age group within criminal justice responses within the different domains of criminal justice. And as we're familiar with this, these suggestions that young adults should be treated as a distinct group within the criminal justice system. And it links to these evidence around developing maturity, the distinct stage of life course development they're at, but also these points around desistance from crime that largely drops away into after the early 20s or in the early 20s. So young people who do offend don't tend to be persistent offenders. So something is going on around this particular time frame, this particular stage of life. Interventions are, young people do react to interventions, to the right form of interventions. So broadly, the hub can be located within this wider range of activity going on and legislation and policy, which we've seen in Scotland with the sentencing alteration that included young people up to the age of 25 in 22, 23, I think it was. Other activity going on across other countries. Okay, so let's just look at the hub itself. So I mentioned before that it was a co-located service. This is what was the way it was designed from the outset, and really what sat at the center of the responses we got from staff and young people, that it was these services working together there in the same space. So the project was funded by the London Mayor's Office for Police and Crime, and these are the Mayor's Office has a number of objectives around reducing violent crime, safety, public safety, young people and policing. So the project was located within this sort of funding and priorities of the London Mayor. So the partner services in the hub were really chosen in relation to the type of problems that young people on probation, or maybe young people broadly, or people in the criminal justice system face. So along the lines of mental well-being support, substance misuse, housing. One particular feature of the hub was their speech and language service, the inclusion of this a specialist service in relation to the high level of undiagnosed neurodiversity or learning and speech and language problems with people in the criminal justice system. So this was a contribution from the specialist service, which was found to be one of the really important aspects of what was offered to the young people. So the theory of change framework, so this notion if you're linking people into the types of services that they most likely need within this kind of pathway or period of their time, that interruptions to offending can be achieved. So this notion of sort of change, people's ability to change if they receive the right interventions. You can see a few pictures here from the hub, which was deliberately designed in this way that people would feel kind of welcome. The furnishings, the colours and the food bank, small library, this type of thing, was designed in collaboration with the young people and to really sort of encourage young people to stay around, spend time, speak with the different teams there and their probation staff. And the staff who transferred over to work in the hub as probation officers, probation practitioners, were invited to apply for the job from the adult team. And this was very much, they were selected in regard to their particular interest in working with the young adult age group with awareness around maturity, trauma-informed practices and strengths-based approaches. So I'm not going to spend much time at all on the sample and methods because I want to present some of the main findings. Broadly, I mentioned at the beginning that we were looking at how did the hub operate? What was this particular design of the probation project with these teams working together? And the idea with this was that if it worked, if it was effective and what it was hoping to achieve or set out to achieve, could it be transferred to other areas? And the key benefits and challenges were what was central to our inquiry, and very much the voice of the young people. How did they experience probation within this specialist bespoke service? Just to mention briefly, the method that we were working with was qualitative research design, and over 3 phases of fieldwork. So what we were doing there was capturing how is implementation of this project, what is it, how does it really bed in as a new program or a new project over a period of time, and how are relationships built up between these teams, these different teams, the probation sector and voluntary services, and as well with the young adults. Just briefly, we interviewed 60 practitioners, probation and external partners. Some were interviewed on a number of occasions. So with the numbers you can see in the slide here, it's 60 individual people, but some interviewed on more than one occasion, and 35 young adults. I'm just looking at this slide here. I just wanted to point out that mainly there was around about 200, just over 200 young people, young adults on the caseload at any one point. And this relates to the Newham area of East London, which is a fairly densely populated area of London, and crime levels in London, policing activity. I haven't got figures for other probation areas, but maybe this matches other London probation areas. Jake will be able to tell us more on that. I'll skip this one because I'm conscious of time. I mentioned we were interested in the implementation. What's the model of this project? This is in the final report, so I won't run through, but we were able to capture these different phases of setting up a new program, a new project, and what it set out to do, and how the structure of the model was embedded, and relationships built, as I've mentioned. Okay, I'm going to go into these key findings. And what I was saying at the start was this co-location, the way in which the probation staff, probation practitioners were working with and alongside the voluntary services, the externally commissioned partner services, and staff often referred to it as this under the one roof. We're all here under the one roof, and we can easily talk to each other. We can very easily refer the young people into that mental health service or into the speech and language. And so this responsivity, the speed at which they could get young people into the services that they needed, that they saw they would benefit from. And staff would say, or a couple of staff mentioned, how this gave the probation workers an ability to really show that there was some sincerity to their work. We do react, we are able to, we take on your concerns and needs, and we are able to act. So this was found to be extremely useful in terms of young people sort of felt they were being listened to. And there was very much a strong team dynamic that developed across these 2 different sectors, you could say, or interrelated sectors. And there's a sense of identity within the team, that they were very much working towards the achievements of the young adults. So their progress towards the end of their court order, that they would get there, arrive at the end successfully and leave probation. So this development of a rehabilitative culture with the 2 professions working together was something that was pointed out. I mentioned speech and language. I'll just come on to a couple of these. I will just quickly read out. Sorry, I'm just trying to move that along. So the probation practitioner, I mentioned this notion of sincerity. He says, the hub, somebody who can talk to them and help them right then and there when they have a problem. That makes such a difference. It adds a degree of responsivity. You can show a little sincerity over time. There's an immediate result. And the manager here, she's talking about there being more people around the table with these different services. The work that our team, probation and external partners are doing with them is really making a difference in their lives. I think just by virtue of having more people around the table, more people in the team. And this quote at the bottom here is around the speech and language service, referring to the largely undiagnosed needs of these young people, others within the criminal justice system. He's pointing out they needed to have this flagged a lot earlier in school. Now they were able to get support around this. And another key benefit of the hub was really how they were able in a way to kind of share their input with the young people, and what was going on within this was the way trust was established with some of the voluntary sector workers in a way that wouldn't be with probation. Sometimes probation is seen to the young people as very much around these notions of compliance. I've got to be here, I have to have this appointment, I've got to be there at that time, and having a little bit of skepticism about how much they wanted to open up. So it was found that these relationships that were built with the voluntary agencies were very useful in the way they could have this sort of bridging role for some of the young people. I was in the middle. He had a good rapport with me, but a broken rapport with the probation officer. And I spoke to him in terms of reiterating what she wanted from him. So the hub, from the perspective of the staff, I'll just move into the young adults in a minute, was this notion that the hub is transformed, well, not just notion, that evidence it was that the hub was transformational. These young people it was impacting their lives. It was getting them involved in work or opportunities for some training that were set up by the employment worker there. And in some regard, I've got the quote here, which I will read out. I like this one, where he really mentions this notion of hope, and to some extent, these young people, they didn't even know, they haven't got hope. You've got to build this into them. So unlocking potential within the young people. So he's saying, I think the young people that have come through, that have left, they're way better off than when they first came. Young people who have hope didn't even know what hope was. Just seeing over time their development, seeing their potential being unlocked is transformational. The hub is transformational. So one of the concepts that we're working with more is this notion of how hope is built or can be built within probation practice, and how that's really valuable kind of contribution to people's trajectories. So the young people, their experiences and voices, they found the hub mainly, not all, of course. It was probation after all, and it wasn't something they really wanted to be going through for the period of time they had. But by and large, they said that the hub, the space, the staff was very welcoming. The staff were friendly to them. They got along well with them. And they mentioned things like, they just speak to me normally. They look past my offence. They don't sort of concentrate on that. They talk to me about who I am and what I want and my family, this sort of thing. So they very much found the employment type of opportunities beneficial, because they're at the age where you're looking for work, but as well they're conscious that they have a criminal conviction, and this can be very impactful in terms of what they're going to be able to do. So the employment service and these notions of hope were really critical to helping the young people kind of develop a level of kind of ambition for their futures. I found this a theme really interesting within our work. The young adults themselves recognizing that they are they are maturing. I'm going to show you read out a quote in a minute, that they are in a point of life where things do change for them. If they look back, I did that a couple of years ago, I wouldn't be doing that now. I've moved on from those friends. So I'm just going to read out this quote here. I think it's in the final report as one of our sort of, it really illustrates. Sorry, this is in the way. Obviously, from 18 to 25, your whole life is changing. From a young teenager, you're basically growing into a young adult. So that transition in itself could possibly be quite difficult for people who may not have support. With this project and with the people here, they help you with a range of things. For instance, if you don't have your family around to tell you, the probation people can help you. So they're pointing out this really important role of this young adult specific project. And this quote, I won't read it out, but he's talking about the probation or the staff here. They look beyond my case. They don't talk about my arrest. They see me as a person. And the employment support, this young lad, they've helped me out, to be honest. They've put me in a better position. If it wasn't for them, I would be in jail now. And this point I mentioned, Tom Tyler at the beginning, in these notions of procedural justice and these 4 principles of voice, respect, trust, and neutrality. This, the way I use it here is, in this regard, almost like a fair process. This young person, she's talking about the way in which she's helped to understand the forms. When she was in the adult team, which she was 24, she had been an adult probation, and now she's in this young person team. And she's saying, I've been on probation quite a long time. I used to go in the adult section. I was quite young. Going into there, it is quite scary. This time around, when I got introduced here, I just felt it was much more bearable. It felt good to come here. No one is sitting and judging me. I don't feel anxious. I feel good to come here. It's a safe place. But she goes on to talk in the lower quote there about doing her papers and having someone there helping her. She had some court papers that, the language, the technical language is difficult for them to understand. And I'm low on time, and sorry, Jake, if I'm taking over some of your space. Young women were included. They were seen at a different site. And what we found with this was, and towards the end of the evaluation, some of the young women, or one in particular, wanted to use the mixed service, the mixed gender service. She'd been in prison for quite some time, in obviously a female prison, and she didn't like this separation of male-female. She wanted to be in what she referred to as kind of like a more normal environment when men and women are together. But the separate service was linked to what we know about women in probation and the criminal justice system, with higher levels of mental health issues and trauma experiences. But I just finish off with this point here that this young woman is making. She said, we don't always want to feel like we're having an appointment. Could we meet somewhere out with our probation officer out on a park bench or somewhere, like going to the service and having an appointment? That was very sort of stressful to her. So thank you very much. I'm here. It may look as if I'm skipping everything. I mentioned at the beginning that it was probation. It was difficult, but I've focused on what were the benefits of this bespoke young adult project. So I'll hand over to you, Jake. Thank you. Do you want me to move through these slides?
Yeah.
Here, this point?
Yeah.
Hang on a second. How about that?
Perfect. Cool. Thanks very much, Jenny. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. Thanks for coming along. So Jenny's given you a really nice kind of overview of the findings from the evaluation that we did. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've been thinking about kind of since then, how to make sense of some of the data, think about some of the implications, I guess, for policy and practice. And one of the things we've been doing is thinking about the concept of what we've termed young adult first probation practice. So what we've done is we've taken the kind of the principles or the tenets of child first, which I'm sure lots of you will be aware of, but if not, It's an evidence-based way of working with children in the criminal justice system, which is about seeing children as children and not children as offenders. I think things culturally probably slightly different in England and Wales to Scotland, just because of the very different kind of child justice systems that kind of exist in the two different jurisdictions. And we've tried to think about whether and how those kind of child first principles are relevant to working with young adults who find themselves in the criminal justice system. So just to kind of briefly go over what child first is, it's underpinned by a set of kind of principles which are known as kind of the ABCD of child first. Thanks, Ross. So the A is about treating children as children, so not as offenders, not as adults, as children in their own right, who have their own rights, and so on. It's about focusing on building pro-social identities, being collaborative and co-productive with children who are in the system, and working at all costs and at all kind of stages and levels of the system to minimise systemic harms by diverting children away from the system. If you go on to the next slide, Jenny.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. What's happening? Sorry, Jake.
There we go. There we go. So I guess it's just important to say that there are both similarities and differences between young adults and children. We can't just treat young adults as children, because they're not. They're different in terms of their legal status, clearly. So there's different sentencing frameworks and so on. We can't just simply, in England and Wales anyway, we can't simply just have young adults supervised by youth justice services. We'd need legislative change for that to happen. Young adults are different from children in terms of their development, neurological development, social kind of status, and so on. They are expected to be starting to become more independent. One of the key things that differentiates adulthood from childhood is the need to accept responsibility for yourself, being financially independent. There are other things which young adults are starting to enter into, long-term relationships, potentially becoming responsible for others, be that children or be that partners or be that older parents, which children often aren't responsible for. So when we're thinking about young adult first probation practice, then we need to be alert to both the fact that young adults are similar to children but are different, and we need to be alert to kind of where they've come from, what kind of childhood they've had, but then what they are emerging and going into, i.e. adulthood proper, however you want to phrase it. So what we've done is we've kind of looked back at the data to think about, well, is young adult first probation practice a useful device, framework, however we might call it, to kind of reshape the way in which we deliver probation to this particular cohort? And we found quite a lot of examples of how what happened in the hub could be described as being young adult, and lots of those things were the things that people talked really positively about, that Jenny's just kind of been going through. So one of the real strong kind of benefits, perceived benefits of the hub from all of our participants was the way in which it really responded to young adults as young adults. It recognised that they were at a certain stage of their neurological development. They were developing maturity, but they weren't fully mature, kind of whatever that means. They were under more pressure to find employment, become independent, and so on. And we heard from young adults themselves. We've heard a quote from Jenny today, recognising that it is a distinct stage in life. There was a really strong emphasis within the hub on the fact that young adults in the criminal justice system are likely or more likely to have experienced some kind of trauma in their lives. They may well have less support from more traditional institutions with that transition into adulthood than other young adults. So they're more likely to have been excluded from school and so don't have those support systems. They're more likely to come from families which are less able to support them with that transition into adulthood financially and so on. So that was a really kind of strong kind of theme that came through. And I think it's a useful way of thinking about what young adult first probation practice should be focusing on. When it came to building pro-social capital, so this is the B bit of the ABCD formulation, in the hub, it was very much linked to employment and then the networks that employment and education brings. I think thinking about it now after it, we've had time to kind of reflect, and I wonder whether there's scope for more social capital building activities to take place within the hub. It seemed like it was very focused on employment. It could have been broader. It could have been more about building friendships, building just generally kind of positive, meaningful relationships beyond that kind of fairly instrumental focus on employment. But still, it was all about kind of building capital. And it was not just about getting jobs for having a job's sake. There was quite a strong focus on supporting people to find jobs that they would find meaningful and actually enjoy and get job satisfaction from. So the C of Child First is about collaboration. Young adults in the hub were engaged and were able to collaborate on kind of their individual sentences. So there was work done around sentence plan, but there was also quite a lot of work done in terms of involving young adults in decisions about how the hub operates, the services that the hub provided, the service design and so on. And young adults really appreciated that. And that collaborative effort started right from the outset. So even before the hub had a physical building, they were consulting substantively with young adults about what should be provided in the hub. So the commissioners worked with, I can't remember, it was Revolving Doors or User Voice, one of the two, to do some proper work around what should be there. And I think young adults, I don't know whether more so than children or not, but young adults certainly can and should be involved. And that's a really important way of adhering to that kind of collaborative tenet of child first. And then finally, diversion. Diversion needs to look a little bit different for young adult first probation practice, because with child first, it's about diverting people away from processes of criminalisation. We can't do that necessarily with young adults who are on probation because they've already been criminalised. So instead, it's about diverting them away from further criminalisation, stopping them from getting deeper into that kind of criminalisation process. And the hub did this through having a flexible approach to recall and breach proceedings, proactively identifying the young adults who looked like they weren't complying as well as they could or should, and actually going out and talking to them to try and bring them back in, working collaboratively again between different agencies, the probation workers working closely with the peer mentors, for example, to find out why that person wasn't complying and what they could do to try and improve their levels of compliance. So yeah, next slide, Jenny. I think just a conclusion, isn't it? Yeah. So I think there's some scope there for thinking about kind of young adult first probation practice and what it could look like. So just to conclude, our overarching finding, I guess, was that the hub was able to support young adults in ways that didn't seem possible in mainstream adult probation. It felt different to kind of normal, traditional probation that takes place in the rest of England and Wales. when you look at the kind of the needs and the backgrounds, the histories of the young adults who are on the caseload, as well as their particular stage of life, it was fairly clear to us that a distinct approach is needed, and that it's appreciated by everybody involved. We think there's scope for rolling out this kind of model elsewhere, and if that's to happen, then we would strongly stress that it needs to be tailored to the local area's needs. So again, in Newham, quite a lot of work was done at the outset about thinking about, well, what does Newham need? What do the young adults in Newham need? And so on. But we would say that there are some kind of minimum requirements. So being trauma informed, having a flexible discretionary approach to breach and so on is absolutely key. I think that the hub in Newham worked fairly well because it had high numbers of young adults. I don't know if a hub that only has a caseload of 10 or 15 young adults spread over a huge rural area is likely to work as well as the hub. So it's not a panacea. It's not something that should be done everywhere, but where there is that need, demand, however you want to phrase it, then we would suggest that hubs are a useful part of the criminal justice system's way of working with young adults, but that it can't be the only one. There are other institutions that also need to be young adult first in their approach. Sentencing is a key one. In England and Wales, we sentence young adults as adults. Yeah, the Sentencing Council is consulting on some guidelines for young adults, but at the moment, young adult status doesn't necessarily afford you any leniency or mitigating circumstances. We think there's scope for other things like unpaid work, community payback, programs, and so on to align with some of those principles of young adult justice as well. So hubs are part of a picture, or part of the puzzle, I suppose, of how we might respond to young adults in the criminal justice system. And I think I'll leave it there. I think we've gone a few minutes over, so apologies for that, but hopefully that was helpful and interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jake. That was great, and thank you to you too as well, Jenny, for your inputs. I think there's a lot in there that particularly the practitioners listening in will be really keen to think about and hear from you in a bit more detail, Jake and Jenny. So I would encourage you to use the chat function to stick in any questions that you might have. But now for a formal response, I'm going to pass over to Nina, who is the Senior Research Fellow here at CYCJ, who's going to reflect on what she's just heard.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Jenny and Jake, for an absolutely fantastic presentation. I found myself nodding along so many times during that. It was really interesting, it was really informative, and it was really important. And I think I also want to thank you for having that focus on young adults. As you kind of so expertly described, this is a really crucial developmental phase for young people, where they're in this transition between childhood and adulthood, and they don't get the protections that children have. And as you say, Jake, neither really should they, for many positive reasons, but they don't also get the entitlements that so many adults also receive. And as Ross highlighted at the very start, I think that's why we find that young adults are overrepresented in our justice system, and they experience some of the poorest outcomes in the justice system. So really great to see this focus on young adulthood, and lots for us to learn here in Scotland. Obviously, we have a focus, as you referenced, the kind of Sentencing Council guidelines. We've been doing a lot of work around youth courts and extending the whole system approach into young adulthood, but really struck by how fantastic this hub sounded. And I was thinking back to some research that we did over the past few years with young adults on socially just justice. And what they described they wanted from a socially just justice system was exactly what that hub is providing. They wanted something that was drop-in maybe rather than probation, but somewhere where they could go and access that mental health, employability, food banks, somewhere where they could access Wi-Fi, things like that. So that just sounds absolutely brilliant. That kind of non-judgmental, flexible, realistic approach to compliance as well just sounds absolutely kind of perfect for that age. I've got about 5 million questions, but I'm really aware that we've got a lot of people on the call as well who probably have lots of questions. I mean, I'm really interested about the benefits of this. I think obviously you're focusing on probation, and as you said rightly, you're not focusing on diverting from the system more generally, but thinking back on a number of our projects, having something like this at an earlier stage as well would probably prevent the need for a lot of young people, young adults coming into contact with the justice system. I'm really interested to hear more about the co-design side, and also how that kind of co-location maybe did support that more trauma-informed practice, which we know is challenging in justice settings. So when you've got multiple people to seek support from, you can build those relationships. But my question might be in relation to that employment and employability support that the Hub offers. Certainly that's been really key, obviously, for your participants, and also in terms of some of the work that we've done. But what some of the young adults that we've worked with have said is that there's a lot of support to get people ready for employment, but the opportunities aren't necessarily there. And what they need is the support in the early days of employment as well, that they've transitioned into a job, and then they're kind of, for all the reasons that you said, we need a young adult focus, that they are perhaps then left and a lot of these jobs break down. So I wondered if you had any experience or any thoughts on that employment support before I open up to questions for everyone else. But thank you, that was fantastic.
Jenny, do you want to talk? I feel like you could probably talk to that better than me.
Say it again, sorry, Jake.
I think you could probably talk to that better than me.
About the employment.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned opportunities. So there were, construction, train, railway, track maintenance, this sort of thing. And there needs to be much wider opportunity. And these young people, they're extremely good with digital technology, and so the employment service there was great in terms of the way she was. And it relates to having a criminal conviction as well. It's likely that you are going to have barriers to employment, but there are ways that you can become self-employed, and what are your skills, this type of thing. So, yeah, sorry, I've lost the first part of your question, Nina, but I mean,
that's really helpful, I think, in terms of just what opportunities, because we do know about those barriers. But the other barrier that some young adults that we worked with throughout was the bit about the support in the early phases of employment. So even if you secure a job, is the Hub able to support people at that stage?
They were, insofar as once they got a job, and if they were still under probation supervision, then they could still access whichever service it was that had helped them. So that might be the employment kind of ETE support, or it could have been kind of the peer mentoring that had helped them to get the job that they wanted. And then whilst they were still under probation and supervision, yeah, they were still able to access it. The problem was, and this is the problem with probation, is once the sentence ends, then the support ends. Now I think, and now maybe I've misremembered this, Jenny, but were some of the services commissioned, or there was an intention, I think, to commission some of the services so they could carry on providing some support beyond the end of the order for a limited time, which overcomes some of that to a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember the precise detail, but certainly if somebody was turning 25 and they should transfer back to the adult service, if their supervision was going well, they would retain them. But I've taken a lot of time already, but I think it's, most of these young people, when we asked, what has been your experience? Tell me a bit about you. Well, I was at school, and around year 7, 8, I was kicked out, maybe it's at year 8, 9, about 14, 15, kicked out of school, virtually all of them. And I remember one of them saying, I liked school. I liked it. It was to do with kind of undiagnosed issues and behaving badly and being booted out. And so I'm just, in regard to employment, I'm wondering if there are opportunities, which I don't have any answers, around, well, how do you actually help sort of build up some of that lost education for that age? Chances to get to university eventually, if that's what would be wanted. But anyway, I'm conscious maybe the floor has some questions. So thanks, Nina, for your summary of the project and pointing out the importance of this group. I'm with you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. That was excellent, and I think touched on a lot of the pertinent issues here in Scotland. One of the questions that practitioners will want to know is about the ultimate efficacy and the successes of this. I suppose it boils it down to, what results did we see at the end of it? So a question from the floor is, I'll kind of summarise it. Did this result in people reducing the reoffending rates, having better outcomes at the end of their order? Was there anything around that you can reflect on?
So there is currently an impact evaluation being undertaken by MOPAC, the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime in London. So we did the process evaluation and they're doing the impact evaluation, in which they are looking at reoffending rates and also police charging or police arrest rates, which we were a bit skeptical of. I still am skeptical of us of using as a proxy for reoffending, especially in London. But that's due to report. Well, I thought it was due to report this year sometime. Not with the reoffending rates, because that takes a couple of years for it to come through, because obviously the proven reoffending rate is a year post sentence. They're also doing a cost benefit analysis, in which they are trying to look at more than just reoffending, which is a good thing and something that we called for in the report. We think that these young adults who end up in the system have such high levels of needs and have come from such complex and kind of difficult backgrounds that to expect people to be able to just stop offending is optimistic or unrealistic. I don't know what the right word is. So they are looking at changes in employment status, education, kind of attainment, and that kind of stuff. So we can't say anything substantive really, but we can say from an anecdotal perspective, and we did talk to 35 young adults, 60 members of staff, over 100 interviews in total, because some people were interviewed more than once. So certainly anecdotally, people talked about how the hub helped them find work that they felt like they never would have been able to do without the support of the hub. We heard about examples of young adults receiving diagnoses for neurodiversity or learning needs like dyslexia, which they wouldn't have otherwise. Now, whether that diagnosis will go on and help them not offend at some point in the future, we don't know. But in and of itself, that's a good thing. So I guess the answer is we don't know for sure, but there's probably a lot of evidence that on a theoretical level points to the fact that it should. But there are also loads of other things going on in people's lives that complicate it and confound the efforts of a hub like this having a direct impact on reoffending. So that's maybe a bit of a fudge of an answer, but also, I guess, a fairly honest one.
No, that's perfectly fine, Jake. And maybe when the results of that are out, you can come back and tell us all about it at a future date. And thank you to Green for that in advance. You mentioned the staffing and perspectives of it, and I wonder if maybe we touch on that. It sounds a more labour-intensive role that working in the probation hubs would have compared to the traditional probation office. Was there anything that came out from that in terms of what qualities, skills, knowledge was required amongst those young adult probation officers? And also, was there something behind the willingness of the organisation to go with the young adult probation hub that speaks to a less risk averse sort of ethos? Was there anything like that you picked up during your studies?
I'll talk a bit about workloads, and then maybe I'll hand over to Jenny for the other bit, to give Jenny a bit of time to think. So workloads. So there was capped caseloads in the hub. So caseloads were not officially but unofficially capped at 30, which is low for England and Wales probation. I think average is 45 to 50 and higher than that in some places. London even worse, because London has historically suffered from high vacancy rates, so really kind of been understaffed. And those lower workloads were really important. It made the work manageable. Practitioners talked about how it made them able to do probation in a way that they wanted to do probation. And it was quite a big driver for some of them. So some of the staff, all the staff had chosen to work in the hub. Some of them had chosen to work in the hub because they were, in fact, probably most because they wanted to work with young adults and they found that an interesting and satisfying group of people to work with, because they were seen as kind of more malleable, a bit more open to change. I think people felt like they could make a big difference to somebody's life more easily than with somebody who was heavily entrenched in kind of criminalized behaviors. But the workloads were also quite a big factor, I think, in why people wanted to work in the hub and why people stayed working in the hub. But then added to that, all the other services under having them all together further kind of created resilience and resource. So Nina, you mentioned how the hub could operate in that kind of trauma-informed way. And one of the ways it did that was by drawing on all the resources. So there was examples, one example of a young adult coming in a real crisis, mental health crisis, and the staff were able to pull together and support that person really well, much better than they would otherwise. And that was partly because just lower caseloads, but then also because there were other people there who had space, time, and the expertise to support people in that way. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Jake. Jenny, any other thoughts?
Yeah, just you mentioned that sort of more resource intensive, I think was what you were getting at, Ross, maybe. But some of the training they had, and so the staff were applied for the role and recruited from externally into the role, and along with that they had this what you could call continuing professional development. So the whole staff team, the voluntary services as well, would take part in a kind of an external trainer came along and was teaching them or working with them around notions of young adult transitions and what we do know about maturity, or even though, you know, the term is peppered throughout the literature and policy documents and not very clearly defined. So, but they did talk about this training being really useful, and it was another way in which they kind of were kind of saw themselves as this team that were really kind of had a different lens in which they were working with these young adults. In regard to the points you make around risk aversion, and you know, I'm not from the probation sector. I don't want to upset anybody who is here, but this is an issue, it seems to me, where a couple of the probation officers very clearly saying, well, you know, what I'm conscious of, if something goes wrong, what's it going to say on the front page of the paper? So there is, you know, how do you trust people more? Like, you know, there are these notions around if you trust people, they can, that if you give them space to demonstrate that they can be trusted, then, you know, we then have evidence that they can be. So I think there are some issues around the way in which, you know, compliance has this, how many times has this person been late? That amounts to a breach, and I'm going to start breach proceedings. And this, you know, being there, seeing these young people, hearing the voluntary, some of the services mentors, like, you know, we can't have this young person, you know, they've just got these issues going on. So, you know, I'm conscious of not upsetting anyone, but there is, people write about it. Monica Barry, she writes about walking on thin ice or something, you know, just walking on eggshells, you know. Is this going to be interpreted as breaking the probation rules? So yeah, I mean, one of the probation, or maybe the external workers, I think it was the psychologist, talking about he felt that they were building a more rehabilitative culture with the probation, but you know, they're under pressure with, this is what we have to adhere to, the monitoring, the compliance, this is how it works. So anyway, I'll finish there, but sorry if the notion of risk, yeah, I find it fascinating, but also slightly troubling.
Thank you, Jenny. One really quick question. The probation officers, was there support offered by them to the young adults to get them to attend the hub, or was there any support to get them to the physical location, or were the young adults expected to make their own way there independently?
By and large, they were expected to make their own way there independently. There was some issues with the location of the hub and some of the gangs. I don't really want to use the word gangs, but postcode gang type things, tensions, which made it difficult for some people to attend the hub. And in those cases, there was some flexibility to go out and meet people elsewhere. The mentors in particular seemed to really want to be able to do that. They felt like getting people to come to the office was not conducive to the mentoring relationship that they wanted to build up. It's also worth saying that the hub was in a wing of the main probation office, basically, like it was attached, adjunct to it. And that wasn't really ever the intention, but that venue was chosen because it was already owned by probation and they didn't have enough money to buy a new building and refit a new building and that kind of stuff. So I think the intention or the ideal would have been to have a hub that was separate from probation, not in the same premises. And that would have perhaps then been even more conducive to people being able to attend, but it wasn't possible for other financial constraints.
Sure. And I'm sure everybody in the call will relate to those issues, Jake. But finally, I just want to thank you, Jake and Jenny, again for an excellent presentation, for the response that you give Nina, and for everybody for coming along. Before you go, please do check out our future webinars. We've got some great webinars coming up about Disclosure Act, about age and responsibility, about challenging the concept of desistance within childhood. So please have a look there, see if there's anything you like, and join us then. But until then, thanks everybody for coming along, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cheers.
Have a